Yes, the nutrition and our health have a lot to do with our food. And in our food, when it is grown healthy and the plant got everything that it needs and also was challenged a bit, that alone shows up in the chemical profile. The plant is further more than a chemical profile. But this is where we concentrate on right now. And what's interesting is that it is more and more recognized that food has an influence on the mood or on depression and furthermore. Here, the Harvard Health Publishing, the Harvard Medical School, has a not-so-bad article with some studies, how there are first indications that food has an influence on the mood, on depression, on health, by extension, on the body. Slowly movement is showing up in this field. For example, that sweet soft drinks, cola, refined cereal products, and red meat, and things like that seem to have an influence. I have written about that in my book as well, that it supports Alzheimer's. But basically we all know this. And what is also every doctor telling us when we are sick? We have to eat more vegetables and fruits, eat more healthy. In any case, it used to be like that in the past. Everybody knows this, actually. But now the others follow what alternative practitioners, doctors specialized in environmental medicine, and shamans say for decades. Shamans, even longer. A change of thinking seems to happen slowly. That there is a loss of nutrition in our food is the topic of this article from the BBC. It is called How Modern Food Can Regain Its Nutrients. It used to be called a little bit different, How Modern Food Lost Its Nutrients. Here it is pointed out that our vegetable and fruit have lost a lot of nutrients. These are old studies from last century or the beginning of the 2000s, where already 50 or 60% of the ingredients like calcium, magnesium, and vitamins, for us essential elements, are no longer plentiful available. What has a lot to do with the farming, the cultivation, also what seed is chosen, how you grow it, and how this is put together. All this has a big influence. And the key is the health of the soil. Through the heavy farming methods, in different ways, for example with heavy machines that compact the soil, we should talk about humus soil there, and the immense use of pesticides and artificial fertilizers and so on, there was and is a negative development of the microbial diversity of soil. Hardly anyone pays attention to this. Furthermore, we hardly have real wild plants that also adjust the soil. There is a sequence. Nature thinks about that. And always the same farming methods have a price. Here, it is talked about that it is not due to a lack of nutrition in the soil that there isn't enough, but they are not absorbed. This is also not totally correct, but I will talk about that later. It always depends on which sort of nutrient we have been brought there or not, through an animal or plant or microorganism or insect, or through the wind or humans. And something that should be understood here, it is important that the soil needs to be healthy. Meanwhile, many people have understood that a nervous system exists in forest soil, the mycorrhizal network, mushroom network, and that through this, when a tree is not well, nutrients can be exchanged or warnings for predators, for example, a complex network that is exchanging, that is remembering, that forms friendships and so on, and this is for sure transferable or should be transferred to the other parts of the earth, to the soil. This, of course, also applies for meadows or something at best. When one recalls how it used to be in the past, there was forest everywhere, and people built up a settlement, and so on. But the soil was forest soil, everywhere, almost always, or something similar. Also the sediment of the ocean, that's full of life. Full of life. They are not so easily cultivated, these little things. The bacteria, just as an example. All of this for sure has an influence on the nutrient uptake. It turned out that the microorganisms are responsible for that the plants really can absorb and exchange everything. And then it goes on with the soil health and the earthworms. It is a very complex network. And if we could bring this back into the soil where we get our food from, just as from the forest, this would be the best quality possible. Because the nutrients are absorbed in a good way there, and transfer is happening. This is important. In this context, it is mostly talked about the mycorrhizal network, and I would really like to remind you not to forget the bacteria again. Plants also have a microbiome, and to this plenty of bacteria are a part of, and they are really, really important. By this symposium of constructing farming, there is a scientist that speaks about plant microbiome and her latest insights. And this shows how very important the bacteria are. They have researched with apple trees and apples, and they found out that there are 100 millions of bacteria in every apple. They are mostly in the core, in the seed and around the seed, and in the area from the stem to the stalk. And you take it in through the gastrointestinal tract. They are not all killed, and there are more positive than negative bacteria for our human health that get built into our intestinal, quasi our microbiome. They are also important for the soil as well, but there has to be a balance. The biggest mistake that, for example, people make that are dealing with effective microorganisms is it is no fertilizer like the stinging nettle. It is like an inoculation of the soil, but you inject it once at different places or locations. Just a single time, and then it should regulate itself. You do not always have to tip over afterwards. Sometimes you have to do this when something does not get into balance, but it also can backfire easily. If there is too much in it, the pH value gets disturbed, and this is not the most intelligent choice. So really think mindful and with nature. So the improvement of the nutrient uptake in the apple refers to this as well, what can be seen in this sheet, and also the well-known nitrogen fixation. But we will get back to that later. Someone who works a lot in this field is Professor Ralf Otterpohl. He wrote the book The New Village. He gives many lectures about it, makes lecture tours, and shows practically how important this humus soil is for a high-quality food, for healthy bees, for everything, that all living beings have enough to eat in a healthy form. He has done a lot, and the New Village is an approach how it could be possible, in big cities, for example, to gain and grow local, healthy and nutrient-rich food with quasi jobs where you don't hang in front of a computer all day, but rather species appropriate. We are meant to move and not only to sit. Many know this. And we sit in front of the computer more and more. And so one would do computer works in the morning for some hours, then go out into the garden, take care of the trees, consciously plant trees that provide food. For example, chestnuts or walnut trees and so on. There's something happening in the area of Hamburg where the people do it for themselves. Someone else who is interesting in this field and brings the wild plants closer to us, and to this also the trees count, that's the biologist Markus Strauss. He brought the eatable wild plant parks into life, this idea. Wild plants that can be found in nature have a higher nutrient density and a higher nutrient content than cultivated plants. That's what he found out, and this is also very logical, if you follow this. Plants that used to belong to our diet in the past, like the stinging nettle, for example. My grandmother also said that the stinging nettle helped her through the war. Stinging nettle soup, you can eat very, very much. That used to be our original appropriate diet. We have not been hunters and gatherers. We have been gatherers and hunters. For sure we ate meat, but not as much as we are suggested. Because we haven't been so successful while hunting. Gathering was what was there, a rich buffet. It is also now very big in this world where a lot is destroyed when you get the eyes for it. You could think that there are studies about the content of magnesium in a wild stinging nettle. I wrote to Markus about it, but there is nothing. That is very sad. But it can be derived a little bit. Here is, for an example, a study that wild garlic has a bigger influence on the blood pressure and the blood chemistry by rats than normal garlic. As an example for terrestrial plants, we again have a look at the stinging nettle. Nearly everyone can classify it. At least when you touch it, you know that you found it. There are many subspecies, many different appearances. The stinging nettle is largely widespread. Europe, America, and not only there, and it has a successful distribution through nature. It is also very interesting for science. What we have seen with the example of marine natural substances, it also produces a lot of natural substances. Not only nutrient-rich, also natural substances. And in this work, a review about different works where it is spoken about the richness of nutrients and the medical potential of this plant. There is a lot in the preclinical study area, prostate cancer, anti-cancer activity in general, on blood pressure. There is also commonly spoken a lot about. But science follows after and supports it more and more. That's why it would be meaningful if we could integrate it into our daily food in a very good quality. Because one could profit from it a lot, and they are much more nutrient-rich. And when you go out into nature, Markus is doing a lot of work in this field and also trainings that is really great. The classification of the plants, it is grown where you are, it is local. You go out to get it, so you get movement and fresh air and all these things. Here is a summary of the advantages and the medical potential of the stinging nettle. For the ocean, of course, we have a closer look on the macro seaweed. It is similar there. I don't want to go too much into detail. It is meanwhile a bit more known. Seaweed is already used a lot in the food industry. What a lot don't know. Here it is shown that through the certain influences, the plant reacts faster. And they get involved with different environmental factors and learn to deal with it. And have to. Otherwise, they could theoretically die. A plant wants to live. It pushes forward in life. They are much faster in this. And in theory, it is like that the natural substances are passed on to the humans in the food chain, so to speak. That wild plants can be a super rich nutrient bomb is here. Everyone who knows the Balearic Islands has seen them on the beach, these brownish grass that lies around in crazy balls and mostly is put to the side. This is Posidonia. It is a seaweed, what was named after Poseidon, and is very old. It is estimated that it can get nearly 100,000 years old and older, and filters high amount of pollutants, but also produces oxygen. The literature is a bit divided by this. In this article it is written that a square meter of Poseidonia meadow, it is also named Neptune grass, produces as much oxygen as a hectare of the rainforest in the Amazons. That would be 10,000 square meter. There are also others that say they produce twice as much, in any case more. What is important here, they are strongly claimed by anchors. With this you can tear apart a lot. It takes a lot of time that the mycorrhiza network, the root network, is renewed. That is not so easy. But here this was collected, in fact the remains. It was not cut out and pulled out of the ocean and exploited, but the rests that were removed at the beach were collected and turned into a fertilizer, similar to the stinging nettle fertilizer. We talked about the stinging nettle. That is what I did not mention yet. It is an excellent fertilizer for plants of any kind. It does not cover everything, but is really great. I always use this and also different stuff, only natural things. Only for this the stinging nettle is useful, and also such remains that get wasted for biogas installations would be a meaningful fertilizer. What was tried out here with sprouts, green cabbage sprouts? Who does not know sprouts yet? They are meant to be very nutrient rich, and you sprout them at home. Then you have them really fresh without transport. This is also an advantage with wild plants. When you pick them up directly, they are still fresh and have no long transport distances, with a big loss of nutrients and changes of the plant microbiome. How it is shown in this lecture as well. Instead, they are made at home, but they can just be as good as the seed is, with its storage substances and the microorganisms that still exist in the seed, and also what nutrients are there, for example, also in aquaculture. The stinging nettle is also a good food plant. That what I am growing at home or wherever can just be as good as the environment. And we are not so far yet that it can be said that there was thought about possibly much. Some do it, but in general, it's about that your sprouts can just be as good as that it was growing on, or what sort of nutrients could come there in a later plant, for example. Here this was upvalued through this natural remains of Posidonia. Also here one needs to keep in mind it has a reason why nature sends it there, so to speak, why it lands there. It has to do with the nutrient cycle. Instead, when you don't want to have thousands of liters of fertilizer for sprouts, it could maybe also be something for the paved palm trees in the city, because the nutrient cycle is pretty much interrupted there. Because fruits and leaves and what there is furthermore in this very little space of ground cannot bring a lot of food for the tree. That is later decomposing it. Earthworms take it and make it small. Microorganisms prepare it for the tree, and it can continue as natural fertilizer, for example, just as an idea. Yes, Another problem is that we have a total focus on single substances. Meanwhile, we deal, thanks to cannabis, with the entourage effect. That does not mean nothing less than the synergistic effect. Many talk about it. What is not accepted by many yet, it leads to that two substances, for example, terpenes, here we have again the plant communication molecules from the forest, they are used with cannabinoids against anxiety disorder and bad mood and things like that. As an example, here that it is more effective together than two single substances. Together, that's logical. How often we need cofactors by vitamins or other things. It is complexly thought by nature, and it can for sure also have a negative effect, because two harmful substances can be more harmful together than taken alone. In nature, nothing stays alone. This has to be understood. These connections react with each other, whether the naturals for the best, this entourage effect, or also to the negative. This is not researched a lot. A documentation that I find very good, that is some years old, is from 2013. It is not so easily to find. It's What Really Feeds Us. It's from the RBB. There you can find a good overview over affected persons, people that have been seriously ill, and choose different ways. Ayurvedic diet, wild plants, picking daisies and putting them into the salad, or vegetable juices and so on, and the complexity of the illness, where it is shown that a change of the way of life of the people has to follow. And also scientists that have made this natural substances research, mostly anti-cancer activity, for example, from raspberries, strawberries or cabbage vegetables, the state of research from 2013. There's also an article referring to this. What really feeds us? Is it possible to eat oneself healthy?